Well, to sin is an archery term. It means to miss the mark. So these are people who aren't oriented properly. And so the city is in a chaotic state. And God tells Jonah that he's going to go to that city and tell them just exactly what's up with them. And Jonah thinks, no, I'm not going to do that. And why? Well, that doesn't require much explanation. It's like, how popular are you going to be if you go to a city full of chaotic people and tell them why they're stupid and wrong? Jonah thinks, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't care if God's telling me to do it. So his conscience is telling him to do it, or his destiny is telling him to do it, or his orientation with higher morality is telling him to do it. You can read it any way you want. And so he thinks, no, I'm hopping on this boat and I'm getting as far away from that city as I possibly can. And so he does that, and then the storm comes up because God thinks, no, you're not getting away. If I told you to do something, you're not getting away from it. A storm comes up. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's easy. Betray your destiny and see how long it takes you to be drowning in a storm. It'll happen immediately, and of course it will, because what's calling you to be your best is exactly the thing that's pushing you forward to manifest yourself most fully in the world. It's what you need. You run away from that, the boat's going to start to rock very, very quickly. Well, and you all know that. You know that perfectly well. It's hell, all you have to do is not study for an exam that you know that's coming up to see everything the storm waters start to rise and everything start to rock. It's pretty bloody obvious. So anyways, he's on this boat and there's a storm, and all of the people on the boat who can't quite discriminate chaos from weather because they haven't differentiated the world to that degree think, oh, the boat wouldn't be about to be swamped if some of us hadn't done something stupid and wrong. And there's logic in that. You know, you might think, well, God has nothing personal against you because of the storm, so you're confusing levels of analysis. But you got to give these people some credit. It's like, maybe they did do something stupid. Maybe they didn't caulk the damn boat properly. Maybe the ropes aren't in as good a shape as they might be. Maybe they weren't paying attention to the weather when they went out on the ocean, you know? Or maybe they haven't made peace with their brother, and so their hearts are bent and twisted out of shape, so they don't make particularly good sailors. It's like the idea that you encounter a storm because you're stupid and wrong is a really good idea, even though it's not of infinite applicability. Anyways, they draw lots. It's a primitive thing to do. It's like, well, it's someone's fault. We don't know who. We're going to throw someone overboard, the worst sinner. Obviously, that's what God wants, some kind of sacrifice. So they all draw lots and someone loses. And then Jonah stands up and says, well, sorry guys, like I know that I've got a problem with God at the moment, so it's probably me. You better throw me over. And they don't really want to, but he finally convinces them. Over he goes. And the storm settles. Well, you know, sometimes if you're in a group of people in an organization, there is someone in the organization whose head isn't screwed on exactly straight. And they know exactly why it is and what they've done wrong and what puts them in that position. And they are poisoning the entire enterprise. And if you throw them overboard, or better, if they agree voluntarily to leave, then the storm will abate and everything will be okay. So anyways, they throw Jonah overboard, and a whale comes up and swallows him and takes him down to the bottom of the ocean. Well, we already know what that means because we watched Pinocchio. It's like when God abandons you because you've abandoned your destiny and the storms come up, the probability that you're going to be taken down to the depths is extraordinarily high, and that happens in people's lives all the time. Well, so down there, Jonah repents. Well, what do you do when you're in the underworld? Well, you've been there before when things fall apart on you. Your friends have abandoned you. You're not as popular as you could be. You can't stand to look at yourself in the mirror. Into the underworld you go, and you think, geez, I've done a lot of things wrong. You know, maybe I should reconcile myself with the world and I could get out of this. Well, so that's what Jonah does. He thinks, all right, I've got this destiny. I better go do what God says. So the whale spits him out onto the beach, and off he goes to the city to tell them what's wrong. Well, that's what that represents. That's these symbols, you know. It's so cool. This second one I really like. It's so interesting because you see Jonah re-emerging from the whale and he's got a halo around his head. You say, well, what's a halo? Well, have you ever looked at a quarter? Well, think about a quarter. A quarter's the moon. And who's on the quarter? The queen. The queen is surrounded by the halo of the moon. The queen of the night. Gold coin, that's the king's head on the sun. That's the halo. Well, what comes out of the belly of the fish? It's the illuminated human being. It's the spirit of the illuminated human being. Well, that's what that means. Well, what does that mean? Well, what else would come out of chaos? You know, if you fall apart and then you put yourself back together, what is it that comes back out? Well, at least you're in better shape than you were before, you know, and then maybe you do that 20 times in your life, or 50 times, and you do it voluntarily. Every time you do it, you're more like the thing with the halo, and less like the thing that's, you know, being thrown overboard by your friends. And then you see this representation on the right. This is a very complicated representation. So in this one, you see Christ, who's carrying his cross with the sun behind him. That's the halo that I was talking about. He's the person who's voluntarily accepted the necessity of death and renewal. That's what the cross represents. And so it's a what would you call it? An abstracted representation of this, a further developed idea of this. And then you see in the back, this is a feminine symbol, right? It's a symbol of birth. And you'll understand more when I show you the symbols later. This is the eternal opening in the world from which new forms emerge. It's the place from which babies emerge. And you can tell that if you look carefully, because you see all these little heads there with wings on them. Those are all spirits waiting to be born. And so the hero emerges from the eternal feminine, willing to die and suffer, and in doing so, defeating the snake's down there, and the adversary at the same time. Well, it's no wonder we don't understand those images. I mean, they're so unbelievably rich that how could you possibly articulate them? That's why they emerged in imagistic form to begin with. The artists get there before the philosophers, long before the philosophers. The dramatists get there way before the artists even. And so we figured it out. We represented it in art and literature and music and drama, and then we're on the cusp, so to speak, of understanding it in a fully articulated manner, and not a moment too soon. So what does it mean for this symbol to emerge from the feminine symbol, let's say, to emerge from chaos? Well, this is a picture of Venus, the goddess of love, right? And so I cut this picture out of a larger picture, and it's Venus manifesting herself in a transcendent space, in the sky, in the same way that Christ did in the previous representation. And she has rays coming off her, and there's all these men who are knights kneeling in front of the image. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that men use the image of female perfection to motivate themselves. And that's exactly right. That's precisely what they do. You see that in the Tom Sawyer story. So Tom Sawyer is about 12 years old, and he's still hanging around with his friends like Huck Finn. And this girl moves across the street, Becky, and she comes out, and he's struck by her for the first time in his life. Something's changed. And the first thing he does is hop up on a picket fence and show off and balance in front of her. And he's saying, well, look at me, look at me. He's like the male bowerbird building something beautiful so the female will approve of it. And it's motivation. You know, and that's something that I think modern women don't really understand about men. They don't understand that, at least to the degree that males are uncorrupted and not bitter because of being rejected, they're doing everything they can to kneel before the eternal image of the feminine and try to make themselves worthy. That's the chivalry story, right? That's what you should encourage in your partner. So out of chaos emerges this first form. It's the feminine form. It's partly the form that represents novelty as such. So, and on one hand it's promise, on the other hand it's threat. That you wouldn't believe, and I don't know, because I don't understand the situation with women as well as I understand the situation with men, obviously, being a man. But I don't know if women have any idea how paralyzing they are to, especially young men. A very large number of my clinical clients, but also young men I've talked to in general, are absolutely terrified of women because they're terrified of being rejected. And the terror exists in precise proportion to their attraction to the woman, which is a horrible paradoxical situation to be in. It's often why men make such fools of themselves in front of women that they're attracted to. It's because, first of all, they don't see the woman that they're attracted to, because what the hell do they know about her? They don't see her as an individual. They see her as the manifestation of a judgmental ideal. And then it's only in establishing the relationship with the actual woman that they can start differentiating between the judgmental ideal and the actual individual woman. And that also requires a sacrifice. And the sacrifice is, you never can have an ideal woman. So to have a relationship with any woman, you have to sacrifice the relationship with the ideal woman, and you have to see the individual woman and separate her from the ideal. And that's the same thing that happens to the hero in Sleeping Beauty, right? He sees the evil queen who actually turns into the dragon of chaos, and it's not until he can defeat her that he can establish a relationship with the actual princess. And that's exactly the case. I had one of my clients who ran this men's group, which was quite interesting. One of the things they had the initiates do, which was very intelligent, was to go out and ask 50 women in one day for their phone numbers. Why? Politely, properly, you know. It was a game, but it wasn't a stupid game. And the idea was, get over your fear of rejection. And how do you do that? By encountering it continually and continually and continually, so that you're no longer paralyzed by this. I love this cartoon. This is from a underground comic for people who smoke way too much marijuana. And it's called, these people are the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, and they were created by Gilbert Shelton, who was one of the first underground cartoonists, and one of the least pathological ones with the best sense of humor. And he writes these stories about these stupid hippies, 3 of them, the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. You see 2 of them there. And all they do is smoke pot and avoid responsibility and run away from the police. But it's a nice satire. And they have this cat. And the fat one, Fat Freddy, has the cat, and they're too lazy to even give the cat a name, so it's Fat Freddy's cat, and it has its own adventures, mostly with like an army of cockroaches that lives inside their like horrible slummy hellhole of a living place. And so anyways, it's quite comical. And so the hippies have stumbled across a small fortune, and stoned out of their minds on cocaine, they go out to set up utopia in the countryside. And they buy this terrible piece of property, but they're so deluded that they think it's like a mansion. And they bring their cat. And I don't know if you've ever had a cat, but cats don't like to move. It really bugs them. And so they're not comfortable when you bring them to a new place. They're like the rat that's been taken out of its comfortable cage and put into a new cage. And the cat, you put a cat in a new room, and it, depending on the cat obviously, but generally they'll retreat into a corner and meow piteously and be very unhappy for quite a substantial amount of time. And so the cartoonist actually mapped this out quite nicely. So the hippie takes the cat out of the box and says, our new home. They're out in the forest. This is an urban cat. It's never been in the forest. It doesn't know what the hell's up in the forest. And the cat's looking rather dubiously and thinks, so this is the country. And then it's put on the ground and it starts to slink, as he says, slink, slink, out into the forest. And that's actually what animals do. It's a predator evasion crouch. And so if they're put in a new territory, they'll hunker down and freeze first, and then they'll slowly unfreeze and start to explore. They sniff first, and then they'll start to move. But they do it like with trepidation and slowly and try to hide. And so that's what the cat's doing. And the cat goes out into the unknown far enough, sniffing, and all of a sudden, pow! It goes underneath the house. It's like the toddler running back to the mother. And another hippie there, I think that's Phineas, says, where'd the cat disappear to now? And the Fat Freddy character says, under the house. And then the cat's under there in the dark with big eyes looking terrified, saying, you'd hide too if you'd smelled what I did. And so what it smelled was this thing that has like the head of a wolf and antlers like a deer, and the tail of a skunk, and the feet of like a chicken, and horrible claws. It's like, well, what is that? Well, it's a monstrous amalgam of that which lurks in the unknown. And so the cartoonist, the comedian, got it perfect. Said, well, what is out in the unknown? Well, you need one representation, not 1,000. And so you take pieces of what's out there that are relevant, and you create a single image out of that, and you say, well, this is what's out there. And you might say, well, no such animal as that exists. And that's actually incorrect. An animal very much like that exists. It's just a superordinate low resolution category. it includes all those weird animals that might hurt you that are out in the forest. That's a useful category.